The Guitar Builders Collective is a group of like-minded people from all around the world at different stages of their guitar building journey. You can join us over on our forum to seek advice or share tips on guitar building processes, materials and tools, or just to share your builds. On YouTube, we have a regular podcast of guitar building chat where you can join the live stream or watch back on past episodes. Our Instagram page shares posts of members' builds and links you direct to their accounts. And for those of you on Facebook, we've got a private group that you can join, share and chat along with. The Guitar Builders Collective is a welcome and open space for all, so do pop by and say hi. Great. Hello, people. And welcome to Dan, down here.
Hi.
Hey. Anyone that's watching live, we have a live stream, so it's a live chat. So please, if you've got questions as we go along, do put them in there and we can see them. And anyone that's watching in the future, welcome. If you don't know about the live stream, we do it every week and we have different guests on. This week, Dan's with us. And I'm going to be quite quick because I know Dan is literally on his lunch break. So we haven't got you for that long, maybe, Dan. But we have kind of different guests and different topics quite regularly. And in the past, when Mark first came on, we were talking a lot about CNC, I think. And we also had another guest, Jack from JC Guitars, talking about CNC. And Dan was leaving lots of comments to it, which made us think, got to get you on, Dan. So for those of you who don't know, I first came across Dan through the Great Guitar Build-Off. Was it? I think it was 2 competitions ago that I maybe first saw you.
Yeah, it would have been 2022, the first one I entered. Actually did 2 guitars in that one. So
I remember.
nuts.
What I remember the most about that was you were the only person I remember seeing that was talking through your design, your design process, showing it in a CAD. Which was really interesting for me because it's not something I'd really seen.
Yeah, I mean, even when I wasn't using the CNC, I was still designing everything in CAD. That's just sort of what I do, really. I mean, I do it in my day job, so, you do what you know, really, I guess, don't you?
Yeah. So is it boring to ask about your day job? Do you want to put that out the picture?
Well, I work in like a structural engineering sort of... consultancy. Well, I used to consultancy. Now I've moved over to a company actually building stuff, but it's the same sort of work essentially.
So I assume then tolerances and exact measurements are very important in your job.
A little bit less so on something like, I mean, we do precast concrete facades, so if you're out by a millimeter, it's not going to be the end of the world, but just a different scale, I guess, isn't it? But I mean, my background is in design. I've got my degree is in product design, so I've dealt with this sort of thing for years and years and years.
And so that's obviously then why it was natural for you with guitar building. Was that Great Guitar Build-Off your first time building guitars?
I built one kit before that, but that was like so I started off, I bought a really cheap £60 kit Strat and built that. And it was absolutely terrible because the kit was just useless. Like the neck pocket was like, 3 feet wide or something. So yeah, it didn't really work very well, but I mean, I got it to play at least, just about, but yeah, it wasn't particularly good. So the Great Guitar Build-Off I entered was the first time I actually did something that I could actually be proud of, I think.
Yeah, right. It's funny, I always think of kits as a way in, but I guess for some people, if it's that bad a kit, it might be the thing that puts you off.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't recommend going for those really cheap kits if you're going to start out. Something from a known brand who's going to give you a bit more quality is probably worthwhile.
Mm. So one thing that I found interesting about your comments was the way that you talked about using CNC. So it seemed, unless I'm misunderstanding here, Dan, it seemed that you use the CNC as for sort of very basic cuts and shaping, and then you do a lot of hand finishing.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of 2 parts to that. It's like I started off doing it that way because when I started with the CNC, I hadn't got any experience with it, so I didn't know exactly what I was doing. So there was a part of it of sort of making it as simple as possible so that I didn't go too far off the deep end, if you see what I mean.
Mm.
And then the other part of it was that, yeah, there is parts of the process I enjoy doing by hand, so why not continue doing that? So, for example, I felt like I could carve the neck by hand, but I did the rest of the routing on the CNC. So it's sort of, yeah, half and half sort of process, really.
Yeah, I don't know about the rest of you, but I hear things about people's relationships with carving necks. Some people hate it, but some people think that's the bit that you really need to do because it's maybe slightly more skill involved or precision, and it's the real test of what you're doing, or it might just be enjoyable. I'm not sure.
Well, for me, it was partly enjoying doing that, but it was also the fact that if I was to do that on the CNC, I'd have to do like a two-sided operation, route it from top and bottom, and therefore, adds a lot of complexity to that process. So that's another part of simplifying it, was just to do that part by hand.
I think part of that process has been elevated in everybody's mind to this mystical place where where you're either flexing that I'm carving my own neck and you're afraid of it, and some of us just really enjoy that part. But it does seem to be one of those things that's kind of elevated to this mythical status where it does intimidate people that haven't done it. I wouldn't be opposed to doing it on CNC, but I actually do enjoy that part. We've in all our discussions about CNC stuff, I can see lots of things where I would like to, have a certain amount automated, like cutting slots, especially for multi-scale. There's a number of things where it'd be cool to have that, but still a lot of things that you want to do by hand. Makes sense.
I think I carved one neck, and then I was like, nah, I'm not gonna do that again. So yeah, I do the double-sided milling. So basically, just the center line, 2 locator pins on the center line, and then you put the same holes in the table, flip, done. Like
part of the problem I have with that is that I'm using a makerspace, so it's a shared machine, and that makes it a bit more fiddly to sort of set up something like that and be able to redo it.
Yeah.
So it's a sort of limitation of that as well, really. I mean, even more so for the body, because you might be able to do the neck in one session down there, but like the body, highly unlikely.
And what's the time like allotted for that when you're using a space like that?
Well, where I am at the moment, it's not too bad. You can generally get on there for a good few hours at a go whenever you want, really. But yeah, it's not always like that. If someone wants to use it, you've got to be sort of accommodating of that, haven't you, really?
Makes sense.
That's really interesting because we've had a few people discuss maker spaces before. How did you come across it?
I mean, were you going during that first guitar build off, and I saw them on, I don't know, Twitter or Facebook or something, just advertising, and then it's literally 5 minutes down the road, really. It's like mad.
Perfect. I feel like that's such a great way to open up the things like CNC building, where you don't have to invest in the equipment to make sure you're trying it out on a good piece of equipment. I think I've said this before. I always used to think I'll buy a cheap version of a tool, find out if it's the sort of tool I want, and if it is something I use a lot, I'll buy a more expensive one. But then some of the cheap tools I bought are so bad that they're not really a good example of what it would be like using that kind of tool. So I do worry that if I bought a cheap CNC just to do some small things on it, I could potentially be a bit more frustrated with it than I need to be. Do I remember, Mark, you said that you did quite a lot of Telecaster bodies to get yourself understanding how to use your CNC well?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. The Tele was like the first design that I did in CAD. I wanted to have like the perfect Tele and even like correct some of the issues I thought were a little bit off with like the 50s Tele. And once I got that design perfect, I started CNCing those bodies and just kind of getting down the tool paths to be as optimized as possible. So you want to get to a point where the tool paths are known good tool paths where you can just let it do its thing. Otherwise, if it's a brand new toolpath, you have to kind of babysit it, right? So you got to go through a few of these iterations before you, okay, that toolpath, I can just walk away and eat a sandwich. Like that's the point you want to get at.
Yeah, I think everything I've done so far is more of the babysitting side of it. And to be fair, they have a rule that you've got to be at the machine in a way, just for safety's sake. But
Makes sense.
Yeah, that would make sense. I really want to get into it. I really want to play with them. It's going to be a while.
Yeah, I guess it's back to the thing we've discussed before as well, Scott, that maybe in England, everything's a bit closer together than it is where you are. So the chances that you'll be near a makerspace, not 5 minutes like Dan, but near it, is possibly more likely.
There's got to be somebody in town who's got one. There's got to be a number of people. Actually, I know there is somebody that I don't know, they do some weird stuff, yard signs and stuff like that. But I know there's a dude on Instagram that is in town who uses CNC. Maybe I could, butter up to one of these people, and I don't know.
So do you think, Dan, then the more you're using it, the more likely you are to transfer more of the process to it?
yeah, the plan for my next project is to do a bit more, taking away some of those bits I didn't enjoy on the previous one. So, for example, the fretboard. On the last one, I did the radius by hand and the slots by hand. And yeah, I'm going to certainly try and do both of those on the CNC this time, because I absolutely hated the radiusing by hand. This one's a Wengate fretboard as well, so I don't really want to do that.
Yeah, that's worse. That's not a fun process. I bemoan that every time I do it. But slots is one of the things that you just absolutely have to get right. I remember one of the first things I ever did, and it was a cigar box, and it was like a shitty piece of poplar from Home Depot, and that I'm using for a fretboard, and I'm trying to cut fret slots in this thing in the front garden with a coping saw, which was way too big of a curve. By hand, it was immediately obvious that this was not going to work. One of the things that you really have to get, some precision and practice on is freaking slots. And oh my God, if you could CNC that. So,
what I did do last time was I scored the lines where they were, so at least I had the position accurately there. But yeah.
That's a smart move. The benefit of actually using an end mill to slot to see the slots is that the end mill will follow the radius. So your slots, the slot depth is curved. So where you don't see it, it's curved and it follows the tang. Instead of using a saw that's straight, or you can kind of do this with your saw, but the CNC is following the radius. And so you get this perfect fit with no hollow anything. You can get at the right depth. There's nothing in there. Like it's just tang and wood.
Yeah. Yeah. So, some things like that we talked in the past about, the lack of precision in humans. Something like that is absolutely perfect for that process.
Yeah, Dan, you mentioned to me in an email, and I didn't admit that I don't understand what you're talking about, but you mentioned something to me about APIs and parametric fretboards.
Yeah,
slightly based on what we talked about last week, but
yeah. So last week you talked about that parametric fretboard from, I think it's Austin Shaner, isn't it?
Yep.
I sort of looked at that, but just gave up on it because of a few reasons. But one of them was being that it's all just tied into imperial measurements, and it was driving me nuts. And Fusion is really horrible at trying to convert it out of that into metric, so I just gave up. But in the end, I ended up writing my own using so the software I use is Rhino predominantly, and Rhino has an API that allows you to do all sorts of crazy stuff with it. And I use this quite a lot for work as well. Application programming interface. So, yeah. It basically just allows you into the insides of the program to automate stuff or to extend it in different ways. So one of the ways I've done that is I've developed a script that allows me to model fretboards pretty much automatically, and I've developed it so that it's a lot more flexible than what Austin had in his thing, so that I can even do inlays in there and all sorts.
That's another thing. My first thought of CNC was, I wonder if I could do inlays there, because inlays have been so difficult for me. I'm not good at it. I don't have the patience, I think, for the really, really intricate, exacto nonsense. I've tried to get into it because it's one of the things that really makes boutique stuff really stand out. But if I could CNC that junk, get a laser cutter.
Yeah, I've been doing inlays. I've done a couple inlays on the laser, and it's like the lazy way to do it, which is why I like it so much. But the cool thing about that is the laser beam, the kerf is like smaller than any end mill, right? And so I don't have to account for any kind of like extra width. I make the inlay shape on the laser on the fretboard, and then I cut out the actual inlay with the laser, and they fit in perfectly without having to think about it. Like I don't have to calculate making it smaller, making the pocket bigger. It just works perfectly. But obviously the laser is burning wood. That's the way it works. It's not ideal, but it's the quick and lazy way to do it.
And you get a little bit of slightly fuzzy outline, which is kind of cool too.
I do have access to a laser cutter down there as well, which is quite nice. Haven't really played around with it too much yet, though. But certainly want to at some point.
Nice.
I've noticed some of the cheap, maybe to help market them and sell them, some of the cheap CNC machines you can get on Amazon that are just quite small base have a way of swapping out the whatever the motor thing is. What do you call that bit? The motor,
spindle.
The spindle. That's it. With a laser, so it can be operated for both, because essentially it's the same device moving it around. But then I'm just looking at that thinking, I'm definitely buying something really cheap and tacky there, whether it's worth it. I can't remember who it was. I hope they're in the chat now or watch later in the comments. Said they had bought one though, and it worked really well for just doing the fretboards. So maybe
I agree. I think that we've come such a long way with technology where simple things like, the motors, right? And the spindles, like it doesn't take much anymore these days to make. I mean, you don't need quality. Like they're all at the same, they're basically all plateaued at this point. They're all made in the same factories, in China. Even lasers, like I have a couple of lasers and I still use my first 10-watt laser to do everything. I don't even use my 25-watt laser. So I think that you can get away with what you want to do with some of these cheap CNCs and lasers. And it might be a really great way to like show people this, maybe like picking one up, determining if it works, building something with it, showing everybody that it does work, or showing everybody that it doesn't work. That is a great YouTube video right there. Yeah.
It's also the software though, isn't it? Because when I was at university, like programming a CNC was like, PhD level sort of thing. It was like, and now it's like fairly simple, really, for the most part.
There's web-based tools that'll produce your cam, like the 2D cam, right? Like if you want to do like 2D stuff. So like you can do that for free just with our web browser now.
So it's kind of mad, really, how far it's come in such a short time.
I can't remember exactly what it's for, but Ben from Marstronics, who's been on. Has he been on? I don't think he's been on here, but he was on the Luthier's Lunch Break I do. So he makes components for guitars like treble bleeds that you can put in, but then it's a variable device that you can change around. And he's been using ChatGPT for so much, designed his website, designed part of his circuit board. It sounds like you could potentially, we're at a point where you don't need to know the programming that much because the basis of it can be made by an AI for you. I don't know if that's the situation at all, if AI is integrated by some people into their CNCing.
I've not tried it for CNC stuff. I certainly try it for, regular coding. It can be quite good at it, but you've got to be very specific with what you ask for, or you just get rubbish out, really.
I can't even trust other programmers to work on my stuff, much less letting AI
And I think they
Sorry,
essentially
Scott.
didn't have very good luck, but it is possible.
Oh, who have we lost now? What's going on?
Wow.
We're taking turns to lose people. Great. I don't know what's happened, everyone there. I'll edit this out before we go live. There we go. I can't remember what we were even just saying, but in the chat, Owen's mentioned that there's a halfway step for a full CNC, which is using a vinyl plotter. So I bought a Cricut vinyl plotter a couple of years ago, maybe more than that. And I haven't used it anywhere near as much as I thought, because as he said in another comment, they are really cheap to get secondhand. I've got a great value for it all. And I use it sometimes for stickers that I'm making or headstock things. But the model I bought just isn't quite powerful enough to cut the thickness of things that I want. But the step up, so the newer ones can cut. They can cut thin MDF. They can cut thin plastic. The most I can cut is really, I can just about do 1.5mm plastic on it. So for some of my guitars, which are sort of sci-fi, I can cut out little shapes and stick it on. But it's not as exciting as I hoped it would be. But saying that, I think it's a good suggestion that those things are brilliant. And so many people use them for headstock decals. And you can also use them to make headstock decals that are like gold transfer and things like that. It's definitely worth investing in. In fact, I think Corey, I'm not sure if he's still in the chat. I think his headstock decals are done like that.
Interesting.
Clearly not that interesting because I've put a stop on our conversation flow. So Dan, what you're obviously enjoying making guitars. What is it about making the guitars that you're enjoying?
I guess for me, it's a little bit different to some of the guys who would, would just tell you that it's all about the making side of it for them. But for me, I really enjoy the design and engineering side of it as well. I mean, that's what I do for my day job, so you'd hope I'd enjoy it, wouldn't you? But yeah, I do enjoy it. So yeah, it's sort of both of those, really.
I was just thinking if, particularly if you were really into design, at least CAD wise, it may be that you can be more creative in that medium than standing there with paint. So working with CNC could actually allow you to be more creative than some other people.
Well, what I found with my first builds where I didn't use the CNC but was still designing in CAD is I found it difficult to get what I had on the screen into the real world, and the CNC sort of allows me to bridge that gap a bit better, really.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I guess if you're thinking about doing, like you've gone to the trouble of making your own not API, whatever you've done to allow you to do the parametric fretboard and make all those changes on it, then you've now got a tool that you've created that gives you so much possibility that you can be quite free to do things that were much harder maybe to do by hand, to push creativity.
I mean, yeah, I would never be attempting some of these sort of inlays I'm planning to do without that, really, because it would just be, it'd be a nightmare. It'd take you years, or I'd just completely screw it up.
So here's a question for everyone, and maybe in the chat or comments in the future. Obviously, we're coming at it all from a maker's point of view, so we'll see a complex handmade fretboard inlay, and we'll think about how crazy it is and the skill that's involved. We'll look at a complicated CNC one, and we'll think they must have programmed that really well, or had some experience to do something that complicated. But someone that's buying it is just going to look at the guitar. Maybe they're not going to think about how it's made. They're going to say this looks cool for that reason or whatever. Do you think we're at a point now where you've really got to make these crazy looking fretboards to stand out? Because definitely what I've noticed at the shows I've been to, when you see the boutique makers, there's a lot more ornate fretboards, inlays and things happening than I was used to seeing before.
I guess it's more important if you're selling stuff. if you're not actually planning to sell it, it doesn't really matter, does it?
But it is one of the things that really stands out, particularly to guitar makers, because we're like, that's crazy. That, you know, we can see the complexity that it took to make that happen. But at the same time, I've always said I like a simplistic look on, you know, fretboard, because you pick some really pretty woods, and the more design stuff you put in there, the frets tend to screw it up. But I kind of also lean on that perspective out of laziness too.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever made anything ornate or decorative. I think all mine have been just basically 2 inlays on the 12th fret. That's it, because I like the look. And the other thing too is I'm a guitarist. Those ornate fretboards, I probably never would play one of those on stage. I just wouldn't. I prefer kind of the cleaner look, like you, Scott. But yeah, it's super easy to do. It's just a question of like, kind of, do you want to do it or not? But I think just that's the way I kind of like grew up with the bands I liked, right? They always had those like fretboards with 0 markers on them. I'm like, whoa, that's so cool. How do you like play that with no markers? But it looked so cool, and that's just stuck in my head. And that's just the way I build them.
I've gotten to where I use little tiny markers on the actual board. But yeah, most players don't really use that. They're usually using the side markers. However, I've noticed with multi-scale, the wider the spread is, that can be a little bit confusing. But you're still not looking at the board. I've gotten to where big 1/4-inch markers on the board just looks really sophomoric and tacky to me.
Yeah, I guess everything's subjective. Everyone likes their own thing. And my question was based on my preference of, I mean, what I prefer making fretboards with nothing on them. But at the same time, that might be because I look at certain fretboards, like Jack from JC Guitars, who was on here first talking about CNC. His fretboards are so ornate and interesting, it makes me think of tattoos almost. And I love that element to it, where it's not a functional thing. Like, there's not necessarily the markers. It's something to do with the design and the pattern that feels like an extension of the paintwork that might be on a guitar.
There are a lot of really ornate, you know, intricate inlay type of things that people have done on fretboards that look awesome. It's just that seems to be a little beyond my capabilities, or I imagine it is. So, like I said, I think I might lean into my perspective just out of laziness. I like it clean because I don't want to do all that shit. There's something to be said for both, and it depends on the guitar and the overall design. But CNC would probably be the only realistic way I could do something like that if I wanted to. That's probably not true, but I'm just not that good at inlay.
So for someone that's not new to CNCing, are there any things you think we should be thinking about as a first step, Dan, or ways into exploring it? I mean, it sounds like you're more versed with it, or really versed with the software as well.
Well, yeah, I was. I mean, up until about a year ago, I'd never used a CNC, so you know, but I had used CAD extensively, and you know, that side of it. So on the CNC front, though, I mean, you mentioned tolerances earlier. That's obviously a key thing when you want things to fit, and understanding, you know, how things fit together, and allowing you enough room to sand things as well when you do get things to fit. I guess it's sort of experimenting and understanding toolpaths, like Mark was saying earlier, and you know, getting that nailed, really. Understanding exactly what each one does and what you need to do with each mill and that sort of thing.
And pretending I know what I'm talking about based on what I've picked up from Mark and people previously. The CAD goes into a CAM, which is the program that you use to plot the toolpaths. Was that quite an easy transition from you? Or is that a whole new thing to learn as well?
I mean, the CAM stuff was new, but yeah, I could pull in my CAD models and start from there. I mean, I was quite fortunate, actually, in that when I started on the CNC last year, I also ended up doing some work at work on the CNCs that we have there. So I was sort of learning from both sides at the same time, which was quite handy.
It'd be nice to have that exposure.
Yeah.
I just never had any opportunity. Closest I've come is a little 3D printer, and I'm sure Cam's quite than a slicer.
Well, with your
Yeah, I mean,
experience,
they're quite different to 3D printers, really, because you've got to define the sort of tool paths and every parameter that goes with that, really, I guess.
Sure.
with all your experience of the CAD, though, and you were talking about when you were at university how different it is or was. Can you explain a bit maybe about that? Because I've got no real knowledge of what it used to be like or what it's like now or how things have changed.
I mean, so I was at university, that's probably almost 20 years ago now. And back then, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't dream of sort of doing a mass produced product via CNCs. It was unheard of, really. Whereas now, you know, someone like Apple is producing like, 100 million iPhones in a quarter using CNCs and related technologies. It's insane. I mean, you just wouldn't have expected that to happen.
And that's because of the quality or the precision of the machines. Or
Probably
also,
both, to be honest, the software and the machines. And the cost of all of that coming down and whatnot, you know, making it more economically viable.
I mean, I know when I was at college, I first started using Photoshop, and you know, it's very expensive to get hold of, and it hasn't. I mean, it's changed, and I would say it hasn't changed very much, but it's probably changed dramatically. But the change has been so slight with each installment that it just feels quite natural. And I haven't stopped using it really for over 20 years. But what I have noticed is when I first started getting into teaching, I would use Photoshop with students to give them an example of a professional type of program. And then we'd look at what they could use for free. And there wasn't a comparison, really. It wasn't as good. Now there's so many programs which are free that are as good for various things that you're going to use it for, different programs for different things that if you have all of them, you can do everything Photoshop does. And it, like I said, it's free. And some of it is more intuitive because it's on an iPad or whatever with your fingers. And that's such a difference. And I hadn't really considered that CAD would be different.
Yeah, there's no excuse now. Like if it's something you want to get into, there's nothing stopping you. Like there are free options, there are web browser-based options. There's so many options to just dip your toe into it. And there's no excuse, right? To say, I'm thinking about doing this, or I want to do this, or I'm wondering about this. You can just dip your toe into it.
Yeah, even video editing, easy. Actually, totally, slightly off topic, not totally. It's been in the press this week that the royal family, the Kate and Will, next in line to the throne, they released a family photo, and it got pulled from lots of news outlets because it has been photoshopped. And it was just something that apparently the princess was doing at home on her own, as everyone does with their photos these days. But because it then got put in the public, there's loads of conspiracy theories about why this child's hand is in slightly the wrong position, or is one of them actually dead and they've just photoshopped someone else? You know, is it AI generated? It's crazy.
Huh.
Yeah, I saw that. It's apparently like there's like a zipper that's like not aligned or kind of moves off the path or something.
Yeah, but because it's so ubiquitous, everyone's using it, really. I don't know.
Go ahead.
Have you used many 3D printers, Dan?
I mean, I used them quite a bit when I was at university, but not really much since, to be honest.
Wow, so that must be radically different as well, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, back then the machine they had at uni, it was an FDM machine, so similar to most of the modern ones today, but it was like, I don't know, the size of a room.
I saw a video a while back of a sort of modern 3D printer that can 3D print in titanium. And again, huge machine. And they were building an engine part, a functional engine part out of titanium 3D printing. I think the 3D printing is the future 100%, especially for guitar building, because there's a lot of things that CNC can't do, in particular like undercuts. And there's a lot of designs that are three-dimensional that have a lot of like undercuts, right? A lot of like patterns and organic shapes that you can't do with, you know, traditional 3D printing. Excuse me, a CNC. So I think that 3D printing is the future once we have like really cool material like aluminum and glass. Once we can kind of use those materials for 3D printing, then that's what guitars are going to be made of, and that's how they're going to be made. That's at least my opinion of the future.
My only regret is not living in the future. I'd love to see the technology that's around in the future and what can be done.
Well, I mean, like we were saying with the CNC and the progression of that, like, you know, if you step forward another 20 years, the progress there, I mean,
we can't even imagine it. Yeah. What does technology look like 20 years from now? We don't know. How is guitar building going to change 20 years from now? Who knows?
Yeah.
Or will it at all? I mean, we're talking about things we've talked about before in previous episodes, but that's because they link into almost every conversation. And one of them is that traditionalist, the guitar player that wants the traditional material and things. So I've got a video up on how a particular tremolo bridge on a Strat works. It's a 2-point system, which is newer than the 6-screwed one. And just the amount of comments on that are around the fact that the bridge has hardly changed since it was first invented, and why hasn't it changed? Because it's an awful design. And then other people saying, but it can't be an awful design because we're still using it. And I mean, it's not an awful design, but there are newer designs that are much better. one I've thought about recently along the same lines of that is neck pockets and neck joints. Like, they haven't really changed since the Telecaster or the Les Paul. It's, you know, fundamentally the same thing. And what are the chances that they got that optimal first time out the gate? But it's what we all do.
Well, all right. So thinking about both of those examples, you can, like cigar box guitar, you can go as simple as just a bolt with the head cut off. Simplistic, and there are some features that you miss out with, you know, that simple design. But the more complicated you make it, the more, you know, I lost the word. Points of possible failure that you have mechanically, and there's something like a bridge. I don't see a whole lot of need for complexity. You know, we've got a few situations that the need derives some mechanical changes, like headless systems and some things like that. But without a very specific purpose for it, there's not a whole lot of. And something like a neck pocket is so simple already. I don't know. I can't imagine what you would do to make it different.
I have a note on that. So I've had the same thoughts, like why the neck pocket, Dan?
Yeah.
And I designed a neck, and it always bothered me that neck thicknesses changed from the nut to the heel. Like, why do they get fatter? Like, why? So I made a neck that was the same thickness from the nut all the way to the heel, and it didn't have a heel. It was the same profile all the way to the end, and I made my neck pocket curved to accommodate it.
I remember seeing that one, yeah.
So is that better? No, but it still made me think, and I still designed something to kind of challenge that traditional way of doing it. So I'm never going to build one again, and that's never the point. The point is we have to kind of like question tradition.
Yeah.
That example happened to be one of the things that watching that happen on the CNC on camera just kind of made CNC look even more attractive, because it just looks cool. The fact that you could cut that pocket to match, it was just, wow, that's super neat. I don't know with neck pocket, but I don't know. Somebody out there's got a better imagination than me.
And why even a neck pocket? Why don't we just float the neck above the body? Like, you know, why put a pocket in there?
I'm pretty certain that the neck pocket design like that was just a matter of making something that was easy to mass produce. And I think there was something about it. I can't remember exactly what it was, but Fender wanted the owner to have an ability to
swap out. Which no one does. Like, who's going to swap out their 1960s neck for a new one? Like, nobody.
Or any neck for that matter.
Right. Because back then it was like a fret job was inconceivable. Like, no one's going to replace frets. Like, replace the whole neck.
Yeah.
There are even things in software that, there's standard practice because, well, you might need to replace this one component and blah, blah, blah. And it almost never happens. I've always thought about that, especially with the Fender situation, the bolt-ons. Yeah, the argument is, well, what if you need to replace the neck? I'm like, what? The neck is everything. Why? When has anybody ever done that? Ever? For the longest time, I only did neck throughs, and in my mind, I'm like, this is the absolute most superior. Why? Why would anybody do anything different? Why would you do a neck pocket? You get the worst of both worlds, However, since I started doing set necks, I really kind of enjoy doing them, separate and having just the neck, and it's not so much length in the material. And however, I don't know. People are going to argue about that forever, and again, stupid guitar people have their goofy idea that based on crap they heard 20 years ago that's completely wrong, that has solidified their opinion on some things.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about that, Scott, because it feels like everything you mentioned was like your perspective as a builder. Like, why would anyone build it? And when really, like, I think of the guitar player.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, it's like, I'm a Strat guy, 100%. Like, I love Strats. I don't care how they're built or how old the technology is. That's my guitar. And I have a lot of them. I told you this once before, if someone gave me a brand new Strat every year for Christmas, I'd be a happy man. That's all I need in life. And yeah, right. So like, we got to think about the guitarist. And I know like a string through instrument feels great and looks super cool, but like, I just don't need that as a guitar player. And it's just all about the subjective needs of the guitarist. And we have to kind of keep them in mind.
Sure. Yeah. But looking at Fender's designs, because they were basically designed specifically for mass production, there's a lot of things about the design that are not the best for, anything other than mass production. I can't imagine a player really enjoying that fat, stupid heel with the bolt-on plate. I mean, are there guitarists out there that really feel, the advantage of this is it makes my pinky this?
I would say for most guitarists, you wouldn't even notice because most guitarists probably don't go up that high where it's going to be an issue. Yeah. But that's just based on my limited playing. Dan, are you a player as well then?
I play. I'm not exactly a good player. I do play.
No, I just wonder because there are some people that we've met that got into guitar building through no connection of having an experience of playing guitar and liking guitar necessarily. It was just a way to get into building and making things.
The thing that started it for me, so I had this Les Paul over here, and during lockdown it sort of broke and I couldn't take it to a shop to get it repaired, so it was like looking online to see if I could do it myself sort of thing, and that's sort of where I started really. So that was one of the pickups had stopped working, so I ended up rewiring the whole thing, putting new pickups in, and then I think I've replaced everything on it now at this point. Apart from the frets, I think they're still original.
It is addictive. I can sort of understand because I always wonder why people don't do things to their cars, but then there is a whole world of people that pimp their cars up. But it's a similar thing, isn't it? A technology that you use potentially all the time, but you can make your own, and putting your own pickups in is the start of that.
Well, with cars, that's more like resale value. You go messing with the original, and it's gone. With guitars, you could put the old pickups back in it if maybe nobody would ever notice.
I don't think you'd want to put those pickups back in there, to be honest. They were so terrible.
Yeah.
I'm not pushing you out, Dan, but I know you have to leave at some point, so do let us know when that is. But just for anyone that's watching, there's a link to Dan's YouTube channel in the video description, as there is for Mark's, mine, and Scott's. And I do recommend, I particularly, like I said, Dan, enjoyed your Great Guitar Builder from 2 years ago, seeing you talk through your designs, because especially having two on the go at the same time, how you work through that.
Yeah, that was not my cleverest idea, doing two at once. It was when it got to the deadline and having to do 2 videos and whatnot. That was horrific.
I don't know. Doing 2 together at the same time introduces some issues that you wouldn't have normally dealt with, and it's a good experience. Maybe not during a Great Guitar Build-Off, but there's a value in doing that, though.
I think there's definitely a value in doing 2 the same time of the same, but of different ones it's a bit harder. But with the same, especially for me when I've been doing commissions that are quite unique, having 2 on the go means I can experiment a bit more and know it's working, and have one that's sort of the experiment and one that's the actual one.
There is the advantage that you can also jump between them, isn't there? Like you were sort of saying, that you do one operation on one and then you can do something different on another one.
Yeah, both of those are advantages, but I really noticed that I got to do this here and I got to do this here, and the one I do first I always fuck up compared to the second one. The second one's always going to go better, which is kind of terrifying to realize.
I tried that last year's Great Guitar Build-Up. I entered, was it last year's? Well, one of the years, scratch and freestyle, and I totally failed at the freestyle and just dropped it completely. Like,
I don't remember it.
Yeah.
Yes. With Great Guitar Build-Off down now, there's none happening this year.
Yay.
There is the Yergs Cup. By the way, if anyone doesn't know about the Yergs Cup, I'll put a video at the end and there's links below. But I've been really thinking about the Yergs Cup, and it's great that it's happening. But I'm really hoping that when this one finishes, everyone that's built something or made something for it is potentially promoting it happening again next year. Or not, it's not even next year. It ends at the end of April, and then in May, we'll all start up knowing about it and have a year to really think about how to do something.
The original idea, I hope we kind of stick to, was that there would be some type of a theme, and I mean, the sky's the limit for that. We talked about like a Chibson challenge or something like that. Something fun would be cool, but finding something that's not limiting as well would be important. So I don't know how we're going to handle that.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to have a theme, but I also like the fact that if someone's late to it or just wants to be involved with all the community and getting some feedback, drop in what you're doing anyway. Don't be like too harsh on yourself if you haven't perfectly met the theme. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if the theme was fairly open-ended, like this year was use what you got, not worrying about, getting, I think the idea was, whatever crap you had laying around the shop. But, a lot of us builders have some pretty sexy stuff laying around the shop. So,
yeah. I cleared out my shop. I found all the pickups and things I need, and I'm going to use 4 table legs to make 4 guitars. That's my current plan.
Nice.
So back to the neck idea. Why does the neck have to be that neck shape? So I've got these conical table legs that if I slice the top off of one or side off of it, so it's flat like a fretboard, I've got a neck.
Nice. Perfect. I love it.
I don't know if anyone will play them, but
that sort of is like the baseball bat.
Yeah, literally. Oh, maybe no, it doesn't work. I was going to do the thin end at this end and the thick end but that doesn't work. But yeah,
I mean, probably make a neck out of a baseball bat.
Next
literally a baseball neck.
I was on that note, getting back to kind of CNC. I always, sometimes when I'm CNCing, I'll use these adaptive tool paths, right? Where you let the machine, the computer, decide what the optimal way is to remove waste. And when you let the machine do that, it tends to make these really interesting patterns. So it's not just going in like, oh, concentric circle, here you go, or whatever, square, pocket. It makes these interesting waves, much like your tattoos, Daniel.
All right.
Like these really interesting like patterns. And I always thought to myself, one day I'm going to build a guitar or I don't do any finishing passes, I'm just going to leave the machine marks on there, leave the adaptive tool path. So you see what the machine did and how it left all the marks on the headstock, on the back of the neck, on the body, everything. And it would be stepped, and it would be really weird, and maybe no one would like it, but I think it would be cool.
I already love it. I mentioned last week how I want to have like the hand of the artist visible in what you're making. So if you think back about certain sculptures, if you're in an art gallery, you might see a sculpture and you'll see thumbprints and things in it. So I love the idea of the CNC thumbprint.
That's what it is. Awesome. But also a benefit, no sanding.
It's reason alone to do it, isn't it?
See, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, the fine sanding on that would just be horrific.
It would be totally rough. You'd see like all the marks. It would be sort of like, I guess, more a little artsy than it is like functional, which is like basically all I build.
I've seen a company that make a textured back of the neck, which is meant to help with gliding, so you don't get stuck on it.
I've wanted to do something like that, but I just Isaac, I forget his channel name, but he won first or second GGBO. He did some hand carving on the back of his neck, and I had already been thinking about some type of texture on the neck would be awesome for that purpose. I just haven't come up with a plan for how to actually do that, where it's artfully done and functional. I do have a wacky idea to lower the surface area, but it's not solid yet. But I've seen people do some high hand carving on the back of the neck that looks phenomenal. I just don't know how in the world they managed to pull that off.
Well, there's your theme, Daniel. Texture and carving.
Have you? So I'm going to go back to Dan while we've still got him. You mentioned a little while ago. You mentioned briefly a next project, or the next one you're working on. What is your plan, or is it a bit of a secret?
So what I've been trying to do with the guitars I've built is to sort of fill in little gaps in, my collection. I mean, I started off, I only had that Les Paul. So I sort of built a Strat and a Telly, and I built this Rev Star, which had some active pickups and some funky stuff going on. And so, that's sort of what my plan has been, is to fill in some gaps like that. And with this next one, I started noticing that when I play these things, the majority of the time, I don't bother plugging in an amp. And it's like, why do I do that? And, so I was starting to think about how I could go about sort of improving that situation, really. And I came up with a couple of ideas, but the one I've settled on is to try and build something that's sort of a hybrid between an acoustic and an electric. So it doesn't have any electronics in it, but it's like the electric guitar geometry built around the idea of an acoustic, so that when you practice, it sounds somewhere more reasonable without having to plug in. So that's kind of where I'm going. But it's, the design's quite different to what you would expect, I think.
Intriguing. And without the great guitar build-off around, do you still feel the need or the desire to make videos of these?
Well, I was thinking I'm not going to do exactly what I've done before, because a lot of that was just because of great guitar build-off. But I did think maybe doing some videos focusing on the stuff that's a bit different about what I'm doing might be interesting, rather than, you don't need to see me doing the fretwork or something, because everyone does that rubbish, don't they? But if I focused on like the design elements that are unique, or the CNC stuff I'm doing, or something like that, I feel that might be a bit more interesting.
Well, I know for me, as someone that's not necessarily going to be doing any CNC, but beginning to become more enthusiastic about finding out more about it, the more CNC guitar content out there, the better, I think.
I guess that's another part of it. That's right, isn't it? There's not all that many people doing it really on YouTube. The majority is sort of hand stuff, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and at least as well, what I see, particularly when you're looking at reels and shorts on Instagram, etc., is you see the CNC working, which is great for a 30-second clip. But when you're watching a 5-minute video or 10-minute video, that kind of thought process or how it works is, more, for me anyway, more interesting, I think. Although there is something about the CNC in action which is a bit meditative and a bit like during lockdown when I first came across Crimson. I guess some of my favourite channels were these people that did acrylic pouring, where you just pour paint onto a surface and watch it slowly move around and go at it with a hairdryer and things like that. And that was just so calming. And that's what I kind of picture with watching, as you were saying, Mark, watching the toolpaths, and especially if it's doing, as you said, the adaptive ones, which don't seem to follow what you think they should do, which actually my Cricut does, the cutter, the vinyl cutter. If you plot something out, it doesn't necessarily go around the edge of a letter. It does a little line here and a little line over there and at the top, and it comes back, and it does seem...
It's amazing what is actually the most optimal path on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You really don't expect it.
Yeah,
Yeah, hadn't even considered it doing the optimal path. I just thought it's sort of random. Of course, yeah, that makes sense.
And that's scary sometimes, like when it's not what we expect, and you start going, where's it going? Where's that angle going? It's going in the wrong place. And no, it knows what it's doing. You gotta just trust it.
You get some of that with a 3D printer too. It does optimize paths, and I mean for it, the slicer pretty much does everything for you. I know you can go edit it, I'm sure, but I don't know if anybody would. But a lot of times it's an unexpected path, and it's kind of interesting how it goes, what it chooses to go to next.
I guess part of that is like when it's infilling stuff, is it, for like support and things like that?
Yeah. Yep.
I've started working recently with someone that does laser printing, 3D printing, and he said he'd be interested in coming on the show. But he doesn't make guitars; he makes mic clip holders, and quite ornate things. But it might be worth getting him on, I think, just to talk to someone that does this sort of 3D printing a lot, and it also makes injection molding for some of his. I think these are sort of two things that, again, I don't know huge amounts of.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done injection molding stuff since university again, but that's all fun stuff.
I want to go back and do your course. what was your course again?
So it's product design, but we had to. It wasn't just like CAD. It was like, you had to design something, you had to make it, you had to do the engineering to prove it could function, and all of that as well. So we got to spend time in the workshop and do all of that as well, which is good fun.
Injection molding does require some CNC, though. You have to make the molds, right? The molds need to be created before you can inject anything into them.
Yeah.
So almost like twice the effort to do any type of injection molding.
Yeah, I guess he does it.
Huge cost.
Yeah, so he does it for production reasons because he produces things en masse. I remember, Mark, when you were first on, you mentioned the craftsman and steady crafting. He has lots of videos on injection molding with a small machine he has in his workshop, and I found them really interesting as well. But I couldn't. Every time I see someone using a new tool, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, how can I transfer that over to use in guitar?
Final project at uni, I couldn't actually make the main part of it physically. It was just, such a crazy shape, you couldn't do it. So what we ended up doing was 3D printing the part and then using that to create a silicon mold of it, and then using that to sort of vacuum cast it. So that's quite an interesting process to go through that sort of way.
Steady crafting was the first thing that came to my mind when injection molding came up. But I know I've seen him do it. It's like a modern take on like bronze casting. You sculpt something and then make a mold of that out of plaster or something, and then doing your carving or your sculpting out of like wax, so that whatever you do mold with can just burn out. New technology has changed all of that, but at the same time, it's still the same thing. But I know I've seen him do some crazy stuff. People doing silicone casts. I've been intrigued by all of that stuff, but I'm not entirely sure where that would fit into guitar building. My limited imagination. I've wanted to put all these things together. I haven't quite done it yet in my head.
Owen's just mentioned this, using his 3D printer to make things like templates, router templates, and fret rockers. I don't know why I'd never thought about the fact you could make a template with it. I always think about you need a CNC or a laser cutter to make a template.
I saw someone make a multi-scale fret slotting jig out on a 3D printer, sorry, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, brilliant.
Designs for a multi-scale slaughter. I got chewed out by some goober on Instagram for not having one. But,
well, you're obviously wrong. You're obviously doing it wrong, Scott, if you don't have one.
Well, so many times in my videos I say, this is the only way you can do this.
But yeah, things like radius gauges, of course, that Mick's just said. I mean, there are so many companies now that do sell things like that. I guess it won't be long before we're all getting them for free on whatever the place is that you get your 3D prints from.
That's the future. We'll be 3D printing our own medication and houses, everything.
I saw someone comparing it to Napster and the way that Napster revolutionized how we listen to music through downloads, that once 3D printers have become a little bit more ubiquitous and at home, we'll all be getting free files for everything and buying direct. In fact, I think one of the people that I follow on Instagram who makes 3D guitars, I think what they do is that you can buy their guitars, but you can buy also just the files to make them yourself.
Nice.
I'm talking about I can't talk. Trying to say something there. I'm just going to share this. I came across this company a couple of days ago, Saw Picks. But what I saw was them making their 3D amp, and it was to match their guitar, and it's all 3D printed. There we go, back to before they were making guitars. It's so interesting. I wonder if it's going to be a thing that they start making and selling the files for. It was just interesting seeing the neck built, and then the headstock is like the scratch plates, another piece that's printed and put on. You can still see the printed lines around it. And then it was just sort of watching this come together.
I want to get a resin printer. That's one of my next things I want.
So I'm not certain. Maybe if I can get Ben on soon to talk about 3D printing, he was telling me about the difference between the resin and the filament printing and the quality and the strength. But I think the filaments are becoming such a bigger range of different types of filaments you can get and different ways of using it, that's potentially a better way forward, that sort of technology.
I think where the resin ones have the benefit is in the fine detail that you just can't get with the FDM type things.
Yeah.
At least generally, anyway.
But it looks like, I haven't worked with a resin printer yet, but there's a lot more mess to it. There's a lot more toxicity. There's a lot more, but yeah, the detail. Well, I don't know. I'm about to limit myself in imagination again. But the filament stuff seems to be a little less. Well, I can't say that either. I'm brain dead. Ignore me.
What people don't know is that an hour before we started the stream, Mark and Scott were online ready to start because the clocks have changed there, and we hadn't between us registered that I still had it set at the British time, so that they've been chatting for an hour before we even came on.
It's about all kinds of wackiness. But the last evolution that I saw, and that's probably well beyond that now, but the last thing I saw with 3D printing was they now have multi filament printers, so you can have up to like 4 different colors printing, and you paint what area is going to get printed in this color. That's pretty awesome. Though they're so fiddly to try to get everything dialed in to where it really prints nice and smooth, and the layer lines are kind of hard to. They're always going to be there, but to minimize the visible and texture part of that. I've been messing with mine for almost 2 years, and I haven't gotten to that level. There's so much to it. It's so tricky, and I think we've said this before. I think it's like the very first iterations of home computers, where people were just dinking around with breadboards and shit to figure things out, and it slowly evolved into some mass-produced thing. It really feels like that with 3D printers, where there were nerds that just figured out you could get a tool path, and slowly they've added these little features, and there's a sensor that tells when you run out of filament, so it'll pause instead of continue to
I think I need to get back to work in a minute, because getting chased now.
Oh, well, thanks for joining us, Dan. And as always, you're always welcome back. And I look forward to your comments, because you're a regular viewer, which is brilliant. And I should say, while we're here, if anyone's watching and thinks they want to come on, just let me know. We're always open to chats with new people. So that'd be great.
Yeah, it's been fun, Dan.
Thank you.
Bye, Dan.
Cheers. I look forward to seeing the new guitar.
Yeah, that too.
Cool. All right. Speak to you later, guys.
See ya. I keep forgetting when we're in a chat. Different questions come up, and then we go on to a tangent. I meant to ask Dan if he's thinking about his wood choices for this acoustic electric guitar, because I feel like that might be more of a significance than it might be with a solid electric.
Sure.
So coincidentally, I have this here, which is something I made probably 25 years ago. It's part of a series, but anyway, it's irrelevant what it is. It's made out of resin, and the resin has got bronze powder in it, or brass powder actually, which is like really small pigment, and you mix it in with the resin, and then you can just sort of scuff up the side with wire wool, and it has that sort of shiny look. It's quite tarnished now because it's been out for 20 odd years, but it was made, I think I probably made it in cardboard first, it looks like, and then a silicone mold, and then cast it. But my point here is, someone mentioned in the comments about being able to get, it's Owen here, water-based resins, and resins which aren't as toxic. So I've been using resins for 25 years. The company I originally used were the only one that I could get access to as a non-industrial business or whatever at the time. And I still use it quite a lot, because the other resins I just find are not as good. So there's still the toxic, hideous stuff from 25 years ago is the best choice for me. But I keep trying other ones out, and some of them, they just don't set as hard or set as clear, depending on what your choice is. So what's interesting though is because it's just so easy to get now. Get it on Amazon. In fact, yesterday I bought a pot of UV resin just to fill in a little bit on a fret inlay, and so cheap and easy to use. It's brilliant. The UV stuff. Still use the old stuff. It's just there for anyone.
That piece of artwork you just showed, Daniel, is it heavy?
Yeah, it's quite heavy because I made it solid. Actually, not that heavy. Maybe 1 kilogram.
That worries me about resin, like resin-based guitars. The weight issue is always kind of troubled me.
Yeah.
I haven't touched it.
After a resin guitar, you're partly after it for its looks, and those ones that have the resin filled bits, so like the river tables kind of thing. They don't have so much resin in, so it's not that heavy. But still, it's. I always say a friend of mine had a Les Paul when I was first in bands, and it weighed a ton. So it doesn't compare necessarily to any other guitar, but if you compare it to an old Les Paul, it's potentially similar. A backbreaker.
I've never touched one, but I assume that they would be super heavy. I remember when I was a kid, I thought the coolest thing ever would be a just crystal clear guitar. And anything you could do to produce that, I imagine, would just be heavy as hell, whether it was acrylic or resin or glass or anything.
Yeah, I did a repair on an acrylic one last year, and it was really heavy. It was a solid acrylic strap.
I wish you could get a hold of aerogel in that kind of quantity. That'd be cool.
What's aerogel?
I think NASA produced this crap to begin with, but it's some type of a polymer or a foam or something. But it's so rarefied that it weighs next to nothing. But it still has some firm rigidity to it. But it's almost weightless.
That sounds cool. It made me think suddenly, if I just made a silicone mold of a Strat, for example, what different things could you pour in it? Obviously, you can do acrylic, but I'd love to use that kind of expanding foam, make an expanding foam body, and then we can do a tone wood test.
That's
expanding
funny.
foam body guitar.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, someone made a Strat out of corrugated cardboard, a Strat body, and it sounded like a Strat. I mean, a Strat sounds like it's made out of cardboard anyway. So yeah, very interesting idea, Daniel. You should pursue that.
I've definitely seen one made out of noodles as well. I think they might have been embedded with resin, or maybe it was super glue. I can't remember.
I've seen a few noodle resin builds.
Oh, you made a mac and cheese one, didn't you, Scott?
Yeah, well, that was just a little bit of a fill.
Yeah, and Curtis has got his paper and resin one coming.
Oh,
Curtis from
right.
Goth Rider Creations, it's been on before.
That'll be interesting. You see wood turners do a lot of that stuff. They'll do all kinds of crazy aggregates. I get a lot of those on Instagram. And a lot of them, include resin and paper, or God, what else have I seen recently?
Jackson just mentioned the Lego one.
Mm.
That definitely does the rounds. I get sent that quite a lot.
Has anyone been watching Ken Parker's Neck Journey series on YouTube?
You have talked about it though.
Yeah, it's good. It's like really good because he uses soft wood, no truss rod, okay? Soft wood. So he uses Douglas fir. All right. And then he uses basically a veneer, right? And the veneer that you touch on the back. And it's a super thin veneer. And to make it rigid, he uses a resin-infused linen on the veneer to make it curve so it doesn't break when it curves. And that's it. I mean, a fretboard, obviously, but there's no truss rod, softwood, veneer, resin-infused linen, and that's it. And he's got a perfectly straight neck that never bows or anything. I think it's incredible.
I'm just looking it up now. We put it in 6 parts.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty worthwhile to watch the whole thing.
That's great.
Just randomly, I seem to have paused it in the middle of the most recent or one of the early.
Yeah, that's his jig he made.
But look, that jig looks like it's made to. Oh, there it is. So is that made to hold to shape the laminate that he's making then? Yeah,
he basically uses that jig to essentially just glue everything together. Like I think he's doing the veneer and the wood. Yeah.
It looks worth watching just for his jigs as well.
Yeah. And that's someone who's got decades and decades of experience. Like he knows what he's talking about. And so I trust him 100%. He's one of my favorite builders.
I'm gonna have to look at that.
There's too much to watch. I've just started. I'm about to use True Oil on something, so I thought I'll watch a few videos to see what the range of techniques are out there. And most of the True Oil videos are for gun stocks.
Yeah.
And even this morning, I watched 3 different ones. They all did it in totally different ways, and it's just so interesting. So, I mean, I've got the way I might normally do it on a guitar, but I'm going to try some of these other ways, see how it works.
I think you have to come up with your own way with True Oil. You know, everything's going to be a little different. One of the things that I've learned about True Oil, the one thing, is that I buy the small bottle. I don't buy the big one, because as soon as you open that bottle, and even if you cap it up right, it goes bad after a while. Like, it starts to do whatever it does, cure, whatever the word is, right? So I started buying the small bottles, and I use them, and I kind of do a single use. Like, I cover my whatever with it, and then that's it. I never use that bottle again, because if I do, it's different. It's a different consistency, a different application. Everything's completely different.
So one of the tips I saw, the guy unscrews the lid, and it's got the little foil on it. He makes a tiny hole in it, and he pours it out into little bowls. So he only uses a little bowl at a time for each coating, and then because there's a tiny hole in the lid, he said it lasts a bit longer. It doesn't gunk up as much.
I believe it, yeah. But you have to do something like that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And there was someone else that always dilutes the first couple of coats with mineral spirits to allow it to soak in better, which I'm intrigued to try, but I need to do some tests to see if it's going to affect my stain that I've got on. 'Cause I'm a bit worried with a mineral or a spirit in it that it might pick up some of the stain. But anyway, we'll see.
And on that regards, I mean, I know that True Oil seems to be like a go-to. Like, I use it a lot. But getting back to Ken Parker, he has a series on how he preps his body, like how the finishing occurs on his body. And he basically, long story short, he uses the French polish. But before that, what he does to his, like, I guess, flamed maple or whatever the tops are made out of the body is he uses resin. He uses epoxy. And he puts it on, and then he removes it off. Like, you put it on, and then you just basically wipe it all off. And you put it on all your whole body, you wipe it off. And it makes a lot of sense, because he's doing a couple of things here. He's grain filling, pore filling. He's doing the same thing basically what that first coat of True Oil would be, right? And then because it's a resin, it hardens. And because it's a resin, you can polish it, right? And so I like this idea a lot. I've never done it, but it makes perfect sense in my head to apply resin to your wood, wipe it off. I mean, completely, so there's nothing left, right? It's only basically what has been soaked up by the wood. And once you get to that point, you can do whatever you want on top of it. And what he does is a French polish, but you can go whatever route you like. And I think that's something I definitely want to try.
Yes, so I've seen quite a few people, because Ty from Shot the Fox uses it as a pore filler in a similar way. But I think he definitely, from the videos I've seen, he definitely wipes it off, but then he goes back in and sands it quite a bit. So maybe Ken's getting even more off.
Yeah. I definitely think that I just bought some Z-epoxy finishing resin for my lap steel project. And again, I prefer an epoxy or resin-based pore filler over a water-based one, because, you know, with the water-based, you have solids and water, and when the water evaporates, you're going to get shrinkage. Yeah. And with the resin, you're not going to get as much shrinkage. And so it's less coats for me. Like, I only have to do it maybe once or twice. Yep. And so I moved on. I don't use any kind of pore grain filler except Z-epoxy finishing resin.
Yeah.
I had done one or two with not Z-epoxy, but just resin. And oh my God, it's brutal to sand back. Or man, it's rough. So I was excited to try out Z-epoxy, and it hasn't been a whole lot different for me. The problem I ran into was I was trying to use it on something that had been dyed, and trying to get that down to almost gone, but not going through it and screwing up your dye job. That was the problem I ran into. So I've been waiting for a project where there wasn't dye or stain, so I could actually use that. And if you got down to bare wood in some places, it wasn't the end of the world. Because especially with an organic shape, it's impossible to get that sanded down to paper thin without actually going through it somewhere. So I've still got Z-epoxy laying around waiting for the next project. Now, which reminds me, Todd had sent me a few different top sets, and one of them is a burl. And I have not worked with it. I haven't looked at anything to see what I need to do to stabilize it, how or when to do certain things for that. But that's definitely going to need a lot of filling, a lot of resin filling. I need to look at some examples of what people have done.
I've never worked with burl before.
It promises to be interesting, looking the final result. I don't know exactly what this stuff is or how it will stain, but I'm kind of anxious to play with it, but I don't want to screw it up either. But it's really delicate stuff. It's it's got to be stabilized with something, and resin's no doubt the way to go. But how and when and
When was the last time you were in the shop, Scott?
Last time I actually did something in the shop was Christmas. Before Christmas, yeah.
Oh, Jackson's just said he's seen several builders use cactus juice to impregnate burl.
I've heard it said, but I didn't know if it was actual cactus juice or just something that they call cactus juice.
Yeah, like lemon oil. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like monkey blood.
What I'd like to quickly just say to anyone that's watching and anyone that's watching in the future is we've got a few guests lined up, but we've got a lot of space for chats in the next few weeks. So if anyone's got, even if you don't want to come on, if you've got suggestions of things you'd like us to talk about, then do let us know, because that'd be brilliant. I guess at some point we'll talk a bit more about the Jurgs Cup, because that's coming up to the end. It'd be great. Maybe we can have a little review of what people have been making and things like that. Next week, we've got Ty from Shot the Fox and Arran coming on to talk about Arran's tone wood experience. We're trying to market this dark cypress wood that he's using. So he makes acoustic guitars. Sounds very intriguing, very interested in that. I've also asked, but we haven't sorted out a date yet, Shane Spill, the king of cigar box guitars, to come on.
Okay.
I find him such an interesting character, so I'll just message him, and he seemed really keen. But he's away at a festival, so we'll wait till he gets back to sort out a date.
That'd be exciting.
Yeah. And I'll try and get on.
I wonder how many of these guests know that we usually have like 10 viewers at a time.
Yeah, I don't think they mind. So here's the other thing that I'd like some help with, if anyone's got any suggestions. Trying to think of ways to, not that I mind it being a small audience, looking at the analytics, it's very hard to tell, but it seems like we have on average between 150 and 200 views per episode, and 90 of which are returning viewers. So we have regulars that come and watch it and watch most of it, or if not the whole episode, which is brilliant. But it's nice to find some other ways to get it out there. And I've been thinking for a while of how to convert this to audio. When I first set this up, YouTube were about to introduce, but it hasn't happened, a way that anything that's labeled as a podcast, which this video is, it's a live podcast, can then be uploaded onto audio streams. Sure. But that hasn't happened yet. So I'm going to look at another way potentially of doing that, which would be good. Oh, and actually, I don't have a link here, but Jaybird Guitars has just started off an audio podcast about guitars. So it'd be great to get him on, and maybe he can give us some advice on ways to do that. But I think that might be an interesting way to get potentially more viewers. I mean, I can rip the audio very easily, but It'd be great if YouTube do introduce that thing where you just press a button and it does it.
Yeah.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, no kidding.
And I've been thinking about, I mean, we're not big enough to get sponsorship, but I think I'm going to have, at least for the Luthier's lunch break, I'm doing as a test run, a few people that are supporting it. And by supporting it, we'll put their name on it, mention their products or whatever. And it's all people that I use their products and like them and have been in contact with them. But that in return, they will put us on their mailing list. So when they do a mail out, they have a mention that we've just supported this episode, go and watch it. And again, they're people that make things specifically for guitars. So potentially the guitar builders that are on their mailing list will then hear about it. But yeah, if anyone's got any suggestions of what we could do, that'd be great. Yeah, Jay Bird's on Spotify.
I should be doing more promotion as well. I just figure anybody who's watching my channel already watches everything else anyway, but
yeah,
that may be a wrong assumption. Yeah, I need to be plastering links all over the place. I need to get better at that.
So Daniel,
plastic bags.
Guitar Gods, we didn't finish our conversation.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
I forgot about that. Just before we went live, we started talking about who the Guitar Gods were when we were younger, and it's partly because I don't remember really knowing much about Van Halen and Eddie Van Halen when I was a teenager, and I think that might have slightly been because there was a sort of rejection of anything that came just before the music I was listening to. So I got into music just as the Black Album came out, which was the same year I think as Use Your Illusions came out, same year as Nevermind, or maybe not so much Guns N' Roses, but Metallica and Nirvana were bands I really liked. But also I lived in London, and London had a great music scene for lots of young bands, new bands on it. So like Skunk Anansie, if you know them, I saw them loads because they were playing all the time, and bands seemed to support each other and things like that. But for me, when I was first learning guitar, the guitar gods, as it were people like Eric Clapton. And I think I first got into him through hearing some of his solo music, but then really became a fan of Cream. So it was things like that. And I had a friend who was into Rory Gallagher, a British guitarist who had died, so had a very limited catalogue. In fact, I think they might only have had 2 albums. And then I was really into, as Owen just put up, Megadeth. So my guitar gods were the people like Marty Friedman and also Kirk Hammett and Metallica, really.
Nice.
So that they're the guitar gods, as in soloing and ability. But I really love playing like chunky rhythms and things. So obviously Dimebag from Pantera, great solos and stuff, but I love the riffs, and I love the riffs of early Machine Head and things like that. So the guitar gods weren't necessarily solo-y good gods. They were people that could come up with these amazing riffs that sort of stood on their own. I don't know about you. I know Scott's a fan of Iron Maiden.
Can I ask Daniel, how old are you, if you don't mind?
So I'm 46 this year.
Okay.
Oh wow. Okay.
It's moisturizer, and the beard, and the low res camera. All of these things help.
It never occurs to me to ask people.
Yeah.
I'm 51.
See, maybe that's it. Maybe that's why Van Halen was more in your view, because you're just that little bit older.
I don't know. We were exposed to all kinds of shit, like Zeppelin and Steve Miller Band and all that kind of stuff when we were, like junior high, and that was way beyond our time. Metallica was always a big influence, but Eddie was the god. Until you realized that Satriani and Vi lived in the world, but they're kind of almost in their own little stratosphere. So
definitely. I mean, I didn't know about either of them until I met someone that was a really amazing guitarist. who had been totally inspired by them.
And it's a shame they weren't more mainstream, but I mean, how could they be when, you know, it's instrumental?
Yeah, they weren't on MTV, really.
They were a little bit when Satch finally started doing well, he at least Flying in a Blue Dream, he did some singing on that album, which was probably not the best idea for Satriani, but but it did get him some videos. I mean, what is the name of that song? Big Bad Moon, something Moon, on the Flying in a Blue Dream album. That got him some videos, so he actually got some playtime on MTV and, you know, in front of a more mainstream audience. Yep. But yeah, Iron Maiden is the best band, past, present, and future. Right, maybe they're not the best, but they've always been my favorite. So.
What's the guitarist? Adrian
Smith and Dave Murray.
He grew up Adrian grew up down the road to my mum, so their parents were friends.
That's
nice.
Adrian is one of the most amazing guitarists in my mind. One of the most underrated. Dave is a little not quite as dynamic. Adrian had a certain amount of bluesiness to it. Something about the way he played just really resonated with me. And yeah, like some people said, Yannick Jeers, however you pronounce his name, he came along later. I was talking about that with my girlfriend the other day. It was like just what Iron Maiden needed, a third guitarist. But here we are.
What about you then, Mark?
Oh, I guess sort of similar to Scott. I'm 50, so kind of probably grew up in the same era. And yeah, for me, it was like, I guess like thrash scene. So like Slayer was huge, and anything kind of fast and hard was kind of big for us as kids. So Guitar Gods it was always Eddie, right? But then it was also like these thrash guys. I listened to Megadeth and Metallica too, but I just was really into Slayer. And then of course got into punk like after thrash. So like, and then it was just like the Ramones, and it was Minor Threat, and it was the Misfits, and it was the Bad Brains, and just took off from there. But those, you wouldn't consider those to be like guitar gods, although they were super inspirational.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I would say, apart from the Metallica, kind of Megadeth, and a few bands like that where solos were important, a lot of the music I listened to didn't have solos in. Or if it did, it was not a big thing. And that's why I think I got so into riffs and rhythm and things. I mean, that's what I loved about playing along with Nirvana songs, is quite often just the rhythm of what was being played was exciting.
Well, that was one of the draws to Metallica and Megadeth. You know, the riffs were just awesome.
Yeah, I mean, some people say that you listen to a modern solo now and it's not necessarily something you can hum along with. But I think the reason I can hum almost every Megadeth song from their first 7 or 8 albums is because I was a teenager and listened to them on repeat.
Yeah.
Endlessly. It's nothing to do with necessarily how catchy they are.
Yeah.
I wonder, you can hum to like the solo, like Fade to Black solo is like the most hummiest solo you could hum.
Yeah. I whistle incessantly, and I whistle solos all the time, and I probably drive people crazy, and I don't care.
Well, I was listening to some Cream again just a couple of nights ago. It was some live stuff, and I just still find Clapton's, even just not necessarily the solos, but his guitars on them are so superb, and they really are the sort of thing that I like. But is that just because I grew up listening to a lot of it? I'm not sure. I do love Tornado of Souls.
You started talking about solos, and I think about the difference between solos where they just they take, you know, some canned, you know, guitar candy and slap it together and call it a solo, versus something that really is tailor-made and fits the song. You know, like Pink Floyd. Kirk Hammett is like a mixed bag. There are a lot of solos where he just phoned it in and just wheedly, and some of them, really, the early stuff is so intricate and so almost orchestral. And I try to picture what was going on in their minds. I know, people had to have said, man, you guys need to get back to your roots, back to the good stuff. And I'm sure that's what they were talking about, Ride the Lightning, Master Puppets, stuff like that, where it was really, really well written and really thought out versus freaking what their solution was, I guess, was thinking, let's get back to garage days, and Saint Anger happened. And decades of love of Metallica is the only thing that saved, got me past Saint Anger to where I could still listen to them. It was so horrific. But I'm trying to picture what goes through their minds where somebody had to have said, you guys got to get back to your roots. And they're like, okay, let's do that. Let's make this pile of shit called Saint Anger.
So it might have been the same year. I'm not sure if it's the same year, but it's a very similar year. One of my favourite bands called the Wild Hearts released an album which everyone slags off as well, and it was almost the same thing as Metallica. It was this weird mix they put on. All the drums sounded like they were tin trash cans, and all the vocals had this weird distortion on it. There was something where people trying to emulate, I think, a bit of Nine Inch Nails industrial stuff, but not really understanding how that was done. And it's a shame because I really like St. Anger, and I think one of my likes of it is having seen them live a couple of times when it came out, and it sounds different live. It sounds much better live. But that's me.
To be fair,
I also quite like this, so I don't know what's going on there.
To be fair, I should probably give it another chance, but it was the first album I unquestionably, without even hearing a note, just went and bought the damn thing, and immediately I was crushed. It was just so disappointing at the time.
Oh look, Saul just mentioned Lulu. I remember seeing there's a program in this country called Jules Holland, later with Jules Holland. So he's like a British music legend in some ways, but only because of being on TV so much. And he hosts this show which has a mix of popular and not very well known music, and they're all playing together in the same space. They have a couple of songs from this band, a couple of songs from that band. This band might be from Africa, this band might be from America, this band may have a number one hit, this band might be releasing their first thing online, and it's all kind of all at the same level. They're all presented at the same level, and sometimes they all jam together at the end. But he had Lou Reed and Metallica on it, and it was the first time they played anything from Lulu live, and you could see how embarrassed Metallica looked afterwards because it had all gone a bit wrong live. It was interesting. I don't know. Sorry, just talking about Metallica. I don't know if any of you got this. Can't really see it. It was called The Blacklist. So it is, I can't remember how many songs it is. It's on 4 albums. There seem to be about 12. It's about 60 songs, and it's all covers of Metallica songs from the Black Album. And it's not necessarily people covering in English. Right. It's not necessarily people covering it in a metal style. It's such an interesting range. And there's something really intriguing listening to a Metallica song sung in Spanish when you're really used to it. But I don't know if they've changed the lyrics a bit to help it flow better, or if things rhyme in the same way. But it just feels different. And I'm really a fan of listening to interpretations of music that's different to the original.
I hadn't seen that, but there was an album some time ago of a bunch of bands covering Iron Maiden stuff that I'd picked up. And I mean, Iron Maiden's the best, so none of them really compared. But it was interesting. It was interesting to see other people's take on those songs. But most of them were quite a bit heavier than Iron Maiden.
I'm just looking behind me. I've got a Ramones cover album with people in it like Green Day, Metallica, Red Hot Chili Peppers, U2, like quite a diverse range of bands that are all really well known, who are all influenced by the Ramones, and all of their covers sound like songs by those bands, not by the Ramones. And to me, it just says so much about the Ramones' ability to write a catchy song and keep it so simple that it can be interpreted so people can make it their own. And that's what got me into the Ramones, that cover album, I think. Anyway, again, not much guitar soloing necessarily in the Ramones.
Right. Yeah, I would have to say like Johnny Ramone probably taught me how to play guitar, because I just remember like sitting there with Ramones albums, just like learning by ear all those like really easy like 3-chord songs, and it was super easy.
That reminds me, the first song I learned to play was "Talk Dirty to Me" from the musical geniuses of Poison. Poison is one of the things that, as an adult, I hear on the radio, and I'm like, "Oh my god, that really was trash." That was, back then it was cool, but yeah, at some point in life, you're like, that really was kind of low quality. Maybe my parents were right.
Do you know about Live? Live, they were big in the 90s. They had an album called Throwing Copper, which I bought, which I absolutely loved. And then their follow-up was called Secret Samadhi, I think. And one thing I really remember about that was the guitarist saying they deliberately written an album with no solos in it. And I think that's the first time I remember thinking about how people structure their songs and how I always expect something of a solo, even if it's just a little snippet of instrumental in it somewhere, and that they'd deliberately gone out of the way not to have it in their music, which I always thought was weird at the time. Why would a guitarist not want to have it in? And it was, I guess, to make it more about the song or something, but I don't know. But yeah, because they were one of the bands that were often in guitar magazines. I think that's, so my guitar heroes were the ones that I would buy the guitar tab books of, etc. And I wasn't really good enough to play all the solos. I was good enough to play the rhythms, and that's probably why I got into so many bands like that, where the rhythm was important.
I could see doing something like that specifically to break the mold, because I mean, it is pretty standard: 2 verses, a bridge, solo, and the third verse. So I can see, intentionally wanting to mix that up. But Throwing Copper was an awesome album.
Mm.
I don't think I heard that album, yeah.
Oh my god. It had some moments.
One thing I remember about that album was I had a Zoom multi-effects pedal, one of the early digital ones, which probably sounds awful if you go back on it, but trying to emulate all the sounds they had, because a lot of the guitars might have a flanger on it, and or something that really adds to the ambience or the feeling of the song. Yeah, that was Lightning Crashes, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's great to know there's lots of people that are into 90s music there as well.
My favorite off the album was DVD. It was just so go from nice and quiet and smooth to out of control and bring it back.
So just to end, we've got an actual guitar building question from Jackson, which sort of links in the idea of signature guitars. That's something I'd like to talk about more. But Jackson saying, from Big Unit Guitars, have any of you thought to build a copy of one of the signature guitars out there? Like Glenn Tipton's Pointy Hammer.
I built like a Tom DeLonge.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah, and I did that. Glenn Tipton's hammer is really cool because I had that poster on my wall when I was a kid. I had like all those pointy guitar posters on my wall when I was growing up. So yeah, it's definitely like etched in my brain, but I don't think I'd ever want to build one. The hammer that I would like to build would be Vernon Reid's hammer from, it was like Living Color, right? That one video, he had that kind of multicolored paint slug. I don't know. There's a bunch of like paint on it, and it was such a gorgeous card. That one's also burned in my memory. It's also a hammer.
I'm just trying to get a picture of Glyn Tipton up. Oh, it's only a small one. It's not worth sharing, I don't think. But I can't remember Vernon Reed's one.
Well, Glyn Tipton's guitar is really tiny too, isn't it? It's like a really small body, pointy guitar. Like I always felt like it was like a little thing. Yeah, here it is.
Bit blurry. That looks like he's chopped the headstock up. It's like the hammer logo just about fits on it.
I've never really thought about a copy.
I occasionally get asked to make copies for people, but they never follow through, of relic guitars, just because people have seen some of the relic stuff I've done. But yeah, I did do one. Of course I did one. Again, I mentioned the Wild Hurts earlier, the band. They had, and I'll get a picture up while I'm talking about it. They had a logo on one of their albums, and they had a guitar made of that logo, and the guitar was used in a music video, but then it got stolen on set of the music video, so it was never seen again. So Ginger, the guitarist, only had it for a short amount of time. So for the anniversary, I think it was the 20th anniversary of that album's release, they went on tour playing it, and I made a copy of it for him as a present. Oh, am I going to find it? And this is one of the things that put me off making guitars to give away to well-known players. I gave it to him as a gift, just sort of to hang on the wall, think I'll get a bit of promotion, because it was when I just started making guitars, and all my photos have disappeared. This is quite depressing now I'm doing this. I've had an issue recently with my cloud that's made all the photos disappear. Let's see if I get this to work. So I made a copy for him, and then he said, oh, I love it, I'd love to play it live, but if I'm playing it live, I need to have certain things about it that are different. So this is the guitar backstage, and let's see if I can get a picture of him playing it. I had loads of pictures of him playing it, and they seem to have gone. There it is. So it's a guitar which is the symbol of the band, which was this smiley face. So it was, great. I made it for him. Then I made the adjustments for him, and then I made more adjustments for him, and then I made more, and then it turned out that he couldn't play it because it didn't meet what he wanted. So here it's got a BC Rich neck on it, because he said, I really like this neck. Can you put it on? So put that neck on. Turned out it wasn't what he wanted. He wanted a 24 fret neck, so I put a 24 fret neck on, and that's not what he wanted. He wanted a different scale length, so I had to change that, and then it's now on his, at least it's on his wall, which is great, which was the original intention. But it made me realize that just because someone's really good at playing doesn't necessarily mean they can articulate a lot of what they want from a guitar. So now when someone asks me for a guitar, I've got set questions I will ask to make sure I'm getting the right things out of them. And I hadn't asked the right questions of him when he was saying what he wanted. Otherwise, I would have got to that point quicker, I think, to know what he needed. But that was a signature guitar, sort of. It was a one-off that got lost, so I made the copy of it.
What kind of questions? How many frets do you want? Do you believe the earth is flat?
Yeah, all of these. No, so I will ask them things like, what guitars do you like to play? And if it's a Les Paul, then I'll discuss scale length with them and say that's slightly different to playing a Strat. Are you aware of that? Because not everyone's necessarily aware of that. For him, it was also partly to do with exactly where the frets joint the body. So he knows that when he's up by the body, if he's on a dark stage, if he's up sort of touching the body, he knows it's this sort of fret. That's how he liked to play. And it sort of worked all this out a bit later on. So I might have had to, I could have moved the neck back a bit and the bridge back a bit, might have made it a bit better for him. Yeah, they're the main questions. And then getting the shape of the neck. So is it a thick neck? Is it a thin neck? Is it this profile or that profile? And a lot of that comes from asking what guitars they like to play, really.
Yeah. Interesting.
Most people don't also think about the finish on the neck. So I was used to do everything in gloss, but then I realized that some people just prefer a satin or a matte neck.
Yeah.
I didn't know that to start with, but now I've been asking people.
Before we got on, I queued up a couple things on my feed, and one of them was Ben Eller video, why do guitars prefer fixed bridges? Or why do certain guitar players like fixed bridges? Nice to see what that's all about. But, you know, I got my own opinions. There's certain things you just can't do without a trim. I mean, Van Halen, Steve Vai. I mean, there's so many things. But it has kind of amazed me how some people have made an entire career with like a Les Paul fixed bridge that, you know, they just don't need all that shit. Hell, Slash, for one.
Yeah.
I guess you could open a whole huge can of worms with that.
Slash has a new single out with Brian from AC/DC singing on it and Steve Tyler from Aerosmith playing harmonica.
Wow.
And it's a cover of, I can't remember, old rock and roll singer. I've forgotten Howling Wolf, maybe? I can't remember. Definitely worth checking out. Doesn't sound like any of those bands. It sounds like something different.
That sounds kind of crazy.
On that note, I will suggest that we end. I mean, because we've been talking nearly 2 hours, and you two had an hour prior to that, which is great. So just so we know, next week I'll double check, but it might be that we're starting an hour earlier UK time, so it's back to the normal time for the guys in America. I just need to check with our guests that that's all right with them.
Sounds good.
All right, great. So thanks everyone in the chat and watching the live stream. See you next week. Bye. Are you looking for an excuse to build a guitar? Or do you just want to be part of the community and see other people's builds? Why not take part in the Jurgs Cup? It's a community build-along where anyone can take part by simply sharing your builds either as photos or videos on social media and using the hashtag #JurgsCup. You can engage in conversations in the comments section and get feedback from others. The build-along is named after Jürgen Zoller of Zoller Guitars, a valued member of the Guitar Builders Collective who regularly commented on other people's builds, giving them encouragement and ideas. The whole point of this build-along is to grow the community, to make online friends, to share ideas and inspire others. This year's competition ends on the 23rd of April, and if you're stuck for inspiration, this year we have an optional theme, Use What You've Got. You can find out more via the Guitar Builders Collective forum, the Instagram page, or our Facebook